the ambition and really thinking big in terms of the program, and how that manifested in our latest cohort in 2021. One of the ways was these kind of really fast pivots for hybrid. And, the winners of Digital Workplace of the Year, Adobe, really kind of encompassed that and showed how hybrid is not just some kind of compromise, but it's a real opportunity.
Because when I'm evaluating a particular user interface, I'm looking for what was the business objective here, what was the end user objective, how much was the problem space explored, how much was the solution space explored, how much did they go into the strategy space, that sort of thing. And you could just tell that now the trend that I'm seeing is people paying attention to these things.
So what do Adobe, DBS Bank, and Fidelity Investments all have in common? For the answer to that ponderable, you have to ask DWG. Much like the coveted EGOT in the American Entertainment Awards circuit, Adobe, DBS Bank, and Fidelity Investments are actually among the organizations that have won multiple awards in DWG's Digital Workplace of the Year Awards. Over the past 2 years, as one example, DBS Bank has topped the winner's circle across all 3 categories: Modern Intranet, Digital Workplace Leader of the Year in 2021, and Digital Workplace of the Year in 2020. Adobe and Fidelity Investments have also won multiple category awards since the inception of the program back in, 2017. And DWG's awards program just completed its 5th year, and the winners of the class of 2021 did nothing short of impressing our judges, who completed a rigorous and thoughtful review of a rich set of entries. And the winners were announced as part of the December episode of DWG's Digital Workplace Live. And Elizabeth Marsh is Director of Research, and Ash Arora, who is Director of User Experience at Charles Schwab, both stopped by the Digital Workplace Impact Studio today for a fascinating and insightful chat about DWG's Digital Workplace of the Year Awards. Elizabeth and Ash, alongside yours truly and an esteemed panel of digital workplace leaders from Fidelity International, Intuit, and formerly Wells Fargo, to judge this year's awards program. And I hope you'll join me now for insights into the winners, the trends, the learnings, and some sage advice from Elizabeth and Ash as DWG prepares to launch the 2022 awards program in late January. As always, happy listening. So, Elizabeth, I'm just so excited for us to have a chance to come together with Ash today to talk about the awards program that just successfully completed. We're taking a pause to reflect on some of the great insights, as well as to celebrate the winners. And it'll be wonderful to get some perspective from both you and Ash, not only with you as our Director of Research and the program manager for our awards program, but then Ash from a judging point of view. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Nancy. It's great to be here.
And of course, I have to bring you in right away, Ash. We've known each other for quite a long time, and it was your first time stepping into our judging panel for the 2021 Digital Workplace of the Year Awards program. Before we dive into that, can you tell everyone a little bit about your role at Charles Schwab and why it appealed to you to join the judging panel this past year?
Absolutely, Nancy. First of all, it's lovely to be with each one of you, so thank you for the opportunity. Now, my role here at Schwab is to manage employee experience from a design lens. And my team's vision is to build a robust employee experience-driven culture that empowers employees to do their best work. And my background, Nancy, as you may recall, has been with both product and solution design for enterprises, but lately I've been focusing on employee experience fronts. And to be on the judging panel was quite appealing because it provided me an opportunity to bring in an experience design perspective to all the submissions and then discuss with a panel who had such a diverse and extensive background in digital workplace and internet solutions. And really kudos to Elizabeth. Actually, I would play with Elizabeth anytime. You just did such an outstanding job, Elizabeth, on coordination, leveraging a robust framework that you use to empower us to evaluate the submissions, and then, of course, keeping us track. But most importantly, Elizabeth, your deep listening to the qualitative assessments was really incredible because, we're all passionate about this and we had a lot to say. So thank you.
It's a real pleasure. I love those discussions that among the judges and seeing all of the comments. And as you say, Ash, all of those different perspectives brought to the awards.
Absolutely.
And so, of course, Elizabeth, it was my first time joining the judging panel. I've certainly played a role behind the scenes in other aspects of the program, but it was a treat for me as well to be able to step into the circle. And one of the things that was quite interesting to watch is how all the panelists who were part of the judging process really took in all the insights about what the roster of applicants brought forward. So it's just such a, I think, an interesting window into not only what our peers are up to, but also the umbrella trends at an aggregate level. And that provides sort of ripe opportunity for us to really start to share learnings as well as the trends out of programs like this and share that across our wider community as well as within the DWG member circles. And so I know last summer you took the opportunity as we were kicking off the awards program to share the learnings and trends from the first 4 years of the awards program. Tell us a little bit about what were some of the most notable trends that you observed before we talk about the 2021 program.
Sure, and it's exciting to have reached this, this 5-year point in the awards where, as you say, I kind of got ahead a bit with the 4-year learnings and shared those, and now we've seen this incredible kind of cohort of entrants coming through from different kinds of organizations, different countries, and there are some things that have really stood out to me. We look at different aspects of the digital workplace program. So we're not just looking at the end result in terms of, the functionality and features, but we also get beneath the bonnet to look at, what's the strategy like? How's the governance designed? What's the rationale behind this program? And one of the things that really strikes me that we see is this kind of clarity and simplicity in the strategies. And by that, I don't mean that they're simple or somehow lightweight, but they manage to articulate where they're going in a really clear and really simple way. And what we see every time in the winners is that behind that is a real kind of deep thinking and detailed research. I think Steve Jobs said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And we see that. I mean, just one example, we saw a couple of years back with an entry from IAG, and they had this digital workplace strategy on a page and had managed to, condense a lot of the aspects of where they were going, the things that were important, the key principles for their program. Into that one slide. So there's something there in the strategy articulation about clarity and simplicity.
And Elizabeth, what would you say were some of the bigger trends that you saw as part of the class of 2021? And of course, as added context, the reason we're talking about this now is that the winners circle was announced only a few short weeks ago before the holidays.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there are so many other things I could go into in those 5-year trends, quite apart from anything, the ambition and really thinking big in terms of the program and how that manifested in our latest cohort in 2021. One of the ways was these kind of really fast pivots for hybrid. And, the winners of Digital Workplace of the Year, Adobe, really kind of encompassed that and showed how hybrid is not just some kind of compromise, but it's a real opportunity for the organization. And so they were really able to, offer this exciting new kind of doorway into their digital workplace with their Adobe Life app. We saw, other examples of organizations kind of making that fast pivot, looking at how they could really take all of the resources, all of the things that they've done so far, and make that work in this kind of new world of work that we're in. So that was one element. I think another thing that really stood out to me, because also I'm very interested in the wellbeing aspects of the digital workplace, was that for some of the winners there was a very strong wellbeing focus. And one example, which was from a company called Finning, where they had really championed the mental health of staff using the digital workplace, and kind of expanded a focus that they have on physical safety to also include psychological safety. So that was exciting. And, another example, we saw an employee burnout dashboard from DOM-RF in Russia. So that was pretty exciting. And the well-being aspect has really come to the fore, with the ways that we're working. So that was very exciting. And perhaps the third thing I'd call out connected to that is the real big people focus. So we had the likes of, for example, Fidelity Investments really being able to leverage their deep understanding of their associates and being, centered around their associates. Again, John Lewis partnership in the UK, really partnering with employees around the intranet. So that kind of focus on people, really bringing the well-being to the fore, and then just, kind of seizing the hybrid opportunity, I think were things that stood out in this last year.
Fantastic. And of course, I have to bring you in, Ash. Not only were you part of the awards ceremony in December, but you also had a window into the first 4 years of learnings that Elizabeth shared. And I'm really curious to hear what stood out for you, whether it was in terms of the trends or specific insights, and why.
Yeah, for me, Nancy, what was glaringly obvious was the employee experience theme. We have talked about it for several years, all of us in the industry, but I'm just seeing that the tipping point has come. I think we are now climbing the ladder of maturity in employee experience. And to Elizabeth's point, you could see that on the real estate on the screen, how much the employees were front and center, that people angle that she brought up. Because when I'm evaluating a particular user interface, I'm looking for what was the business objective here, what was the end user objective, how much was the problem space explored, how much was the solution space explored, how much did they go into the strategy space, that sort of thing. And you could just tell that now the trend that I'm seeing is people are paying attention to these things.
I think that's a great observation. And of course, one of the things that we also saw was that with governance as a prominent trend, it's a sign that we're moving from sort of the war room mentality that was very much in play as the pandemic started to really kick in, and organizations had gone to, in many cases, remote work strategies, literally pivoting in a matter of a few weeks. And we're pushing lots of technology and solutions at people to enable them to work from home. And last year ended up being a big focus on governance to sort of pull back and put structure in place for the things that had been rolled out really quickly in order to support, business resiliency needs. I know that from previous conversations, Ash, you've talked about the global angle as well. Anything to add there?
On the global angle, I think it was really about the, for certain enterprises, how complex an intranet can be, because they have to now cater to a multilingual kind of like environment. So how would that impact, for example, personalization, the different feeds that feed into the intranet? How would they have to tackle that aspect? So the complexity becomes really high. And I was able to see this time that companies are up to that challenge. They're taking that on. Now, whether they are leveraging mature platforms for content management, that sort of thing, that's really great if they're doing that. But the really crux is that they are actually taking that on and making a difference to their employees.
Terrific. And so, Elizabeth, just in the spirit of exploring the trends and insights a bit further, I think it might be worth framing here a little bit about how the awards program changed this past year from previous years, and maybe talk a little bit about some examples in the winner's circle specifically, and what stood out about the class of 2021.
Sure, Nancy. Well, of course, now this is, as I said, this been our 5th year of running the Digital Workplace of the Year Awards. And we decided to add an award this year to acknowledge the best of modern intranets. And, we felt that it was important to bring that to the fore. In our industry, we periodically hear that the intranet is dead. And of course, we know it very much isn't. It's really that kind of beating heart at the center of the digital workplace, and a really essential sort of doorway into the wider digital workplace. And so we wanted to have the opportunity to celebrate that work because it's so important. And it was fantastic to see the level of entries in that category. And, it was incredibly vibrant. And so, we had to work quite hard to sort of whittle down among the various entrants and for the judges to kind of, mark, who was really worthy of the awards. And of course, the overall modern intranet of the year was won by DBS Bank in Singapore. And they embody, a few of the things that we've talked about, and in particular, this employee-led element and the focus on employee experience. I think one of the things that the judges really liked there is that they really have embedded this idea of employee experience as underpinning customer experience, and kind of really got that message of, how, their motto of making work joyful underpins their goal of making banking joyful. So much just, from within that one entry. In some of the other areas, one of the ones I find interesting, and we often come back to strategy and governance, was that the Coca-Cola company actually won an award, a category award, in both areas. So in digital workplace, they won it for their governance, and in modern intranet, they won it for their strategy. And part of their win, or their double win, was about how they managed to really neatly articulate the intranet strategy, but very strongly connect it into the digital workplace strategy as well. And that's something that we sometimes see missing. So I think there's a really strong lesson in, what they achieved with those two awards.
And, I think this idea that we're seeing a coming of age for the digital workplace, spurred in part by the pandemic, but also because now the digital workplace has its rightful place as a strategic asset inside of organizations. The art of telling the story seems to have matured very quickly. Quite a few member organizations inside of DWG's circle have really put a lot of time and energy around defining the strategy and the roadmap to get to the point on the horizon they're looking to achieve as part of the wider organizational strategy. And so I think it's refreshing to be able to see how crisp and compelling the stories are, whether it's from the likes of the Coca-Cola Company or DBS Bank, not to mention, others on the roster at this point. I don't want to steal your thunder, Elizabeth, in rounding out the winner's circle for us.
Well, and, you saying that, it's interesting to see some organizations come back and win, they might win a particular award one year and then come back and actually with a different win. And it was interesting to see Fidelity Investments in 2020 winning for strategic vision, and then returning in 2021 with a story of how they've been implementing that vision to deliver an exceptional associate experience, for which they won a category award. And so to see that progression, and we've seen it in the past, for example, with American Express, winning for user engagement in one year and then returning and winning actually the overall award. So part of it is seeing that progression across the years as well. There's a few others I could call out, and perhaps an interesting one this year, and a slightly different entry, was from DomRF, a Russian financial development institution, taking a very innovative approach to the digital workplace with quite extensive interactive dashboarding to support decision making for quite a wide range of roles. As I mentioned, they have this AI-empowered employee burnout analysis, a unified onboarding tool for recruits. So a real data-driven approach, but thinking about how people need to perform, make decisions, the real health of the organization. So that was a very interesting one to see.
And so, Elizabeth, you've shared that there have been multi-year winners in the mix. And certainly we saw that for the Digital Workplace of the Year umbrella winner, as well as the Digital Workplace Leader of the Year. So tell us a little bit about those two headliners.
Yeah, well, DBS Bank have really been sort of mopping up on different awards. So they won Digital Workplace of the Year, of course, as overall winners in 2020. And they've entered in 2021 into the Modern Intranet of the Year category and won there. And then, of course, we had Linda Lee winning the Digital Workplace of Leader of the Year in 2021. I think, looking at that story, both with Linda Lee, the work that she's led, this is kind of a decade or more long story. And so, with these award wins, they seem, just amazing what they've achieved, but it really is the fruit of a great deal of labor. And so when you see someone like Linda Lee, winning that award, it does feel very, very well deserved, I think.
And also tell us about the Digital Workplace of the Year winner.
Okay, yeah. So we had a win there from Adobe. I mentioned a little bit about this real fast pivot for hybrid. And so they came forward with a new and very exciting doorway to their digital workplace in the form of the Adobe Life app that was launched March 2021. And I think one of the judges said, this is a great example of seizing the moment, of really recognizing a key inflection point and not just adapting, but pivoting in order to thrive. And they've brought together a really comprehensive set of services, including campus features such as space booking and wayfinding, sort of work anywhere features like news and podcasts, return to the office things for some people. And, when we looked at that, it really provides a new doorway to the digital workplace that complements their modern intranet inside Adobe, which already has that kind of powerful personalized experience. And under that, as often we see, really strong governance framework to support that. So I think that was a great example, while perhaps some organizations are just thinking, what should we do about hybrid? And Adobe just kind of went for it, which was exciting to see.
That's for sure. And Ash, no doubt you had some interesting things that came to light for you. What would you say are the things that surprised you the most about either the applicant pool or the winner's circle as you stepped through the judging process?
There were four actually, for Adobe, obviously, DBS, John Lewis Partnership, and Coca-Cola. Dom RF, let me get that one first. Let me speak to Dom.RF. Absolutely spot on, Elizabeth's observations. I think they're really pushing the boundaries, not just on the internet side of things, but really what that future of work could be. So very impressive, very well-deserved award on innovation. But going back to these four, Adobe, Coca-Cola, John Lewis, and DBS Bank, as I was evaluating, I was so present to this quote from Mark Levy, who's a former head of employee experience at Airbnb and Allbirds. He said employee experience is about doing things with and for your employees, not to them. And that's really what came through for these. So kudos to these companies that they actually co-created certain experiences with their employees. Otherwise, there's no way the kind of use cases they were highlighting and what we evaluated, they wouldn't have made it front and center.
Fantastic. And Elizabeth, this is kind of an interesting time of the year. Of course, DWG is moving into its 20th year. You mentioned that we've just completed the 5th cycle for the awards program and had lots of great learnings to share as part of this conversation. Of course, I know that many others will want to dive into the details about the wider set of category winners and learn more about the overall winners as well. And when we put the show notes out about this podcast, we'll be sure to include links to various articles that you have published and shared alongside other DWG team members on this topic. But I also know that we're going to be gearing up for the 2022 awards program. And so I know there's some changes from last year to this. Can you tell us a little bit about the timeline?
I can, yes. One thing to mention as well, just before I do that, is that, with these 5 years of insights, we are putting together a report which we'll be releasing publicly. So that people can get a real deep dive into, what we've learned from the winners, and we'll have voices from previous winners and from judges within that. So that's something to look out for. The 2022 awards open on the 24th of January. So there'll be lots of information on DWG's website for that. Those close on the 4th of April. So folks have got, a good couple of months to put together their entries, and we'll be presenting the awards online in June. And very much part, as you say, Nancy, of that 20-year celebration.
Exciting year for us all within DWG, and I think it's an important mile marker for industry circles as well. And so, Elizabeth, I know that the pandemic was certainly a big theme influencing the roster of applicants this year and the stories they wanted to share. Are there any special themes that you anticipate taking hold as part of the class of 2022?
I think, this theme that's ongoing around hybrids, and of course we're about to publish research to members around that, of getting beyond the basics, of getting beyond, just how many days do we work here, or into something much more nuanced and much more exciting in terms of that possibility area for the future of work. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of creativity in that area from, leading organizations. And again, in some ways, this continuation of, Ash talked about this kind of coming of age in terms of employee experience. And I'm really just excited to see what is going to come forth in the next round of entries. So that's going to be really interesting to see.
Fantastic. And I'd love to get input from both of you as to your advice for aspiring applicants and winners in 2022. Maybe Elizabeth, you can lead that off.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll be publishing some more guidance. So one thing I would say, and I'm pretty sure Ash is going to underline this, is the judges have to score based on your entry. So you can have the best digital workplace or modern intranet in the world, but if the award entry doesn't do it justice, then they can't score it as highly as it might deserve. So really think and make sure that entry kind of reflects your achievements, and maybe think about the entry process not as just perhaps a job to be done, but really a chance to reflect, to bring the team together to discuss, celebrate the journey that you've come on so far, and tell us about it in depth.
I should start where Elizabeth alluded earlier, right? In terms of that entry process, you want to empower the judges so that they can truly assess the submission objectively. So here are the things that will help. First of all, clearly define that business and user objective. Link the design back to those objectives, share why these were important, what value would these provide to your employees, give us optics into the personas or user segments or the roles who are using them, what were their pain points, what were the opportunities that you addressed. The other thing is you must actually tie back the usage and satisfaction metrics to the objectives. And on the lastly, what I would say is on the user engagement front, from an evaluation perspective, it truly helps if you highlight what kind of testing did you do, what changed as a result of that testing. That really gives us optics into how robust your design thinking really was to publish the modern intranet.
Some great advice as well. And I'll throw a bonus piece of advice into the discussion, and that is to say, over the years when I've talked to members, especially within DWG, there have been many that were hesitant about applying from the start because they were on a journey and didn't think that they had reached perfection in their digital workplace programs. And my advice to them was that the application process in and of itself can be a great source of learning. So if you have an ambition to be part of this elite group of organizations that have achieved a level of success, share your story as it's unfolding, because you're never done with a digital workplace in whole or in part, whether it's at a modern intranet level or the wider ecosystem. But often what we'll find is that as organizations are telling their story, we can come away with some really interesting insights. And that has given rise to these special category awards that Elizabeth was talking about. So you have organizations that are on the journey and come up as a game changer or are cited for excellence around the employee experience or other practice areas. And those are stories that are worth sharing. And when you look at them in combination, those are the power of the digital workplace transformation story that we're watching unfold across our industry circles. So if you've got a story worth sharing, even if it's on specific aspects of the digital workplace, it's worth sharing it through this process. And we can share the learnings for the portfolio winners overall, as well as the category winners, and enrich the conversation across our peer group. So we're close to the end of our time together, Ash and Elizabeth. So this is your window to share any final thoughts, reflections, advice as we wrap up. So Ash, let's start with you and then we'll go on to Elizabeth.
Absolutely. Nancy, for me, what I'm really looking forward to, we have just completed some of the research internally here in my parent organization, and there are themes which I had not suspected would come up, but the themes that emerge for us are connection and belonging, being part of digital communities, bringing diversity and inclusion more into the not just the intranet, but as a daily kind of exchange. And well-being, I think well-being is now at a point where, what are those boundaries? How does it look like to have psychological safety? How do I reveal my authentic self versus the work persona in a hybrid setting? Those are the things I'm looking forward to actually this year. How would digital workplace enable these new dynamics that we haven't, experienced before? So that's what I will be on the lookout for.
Mm-hmm. And I can tell you what I'm hearing a lot about as well is people talking about the importance of surfacing information that allows people to make decisions quickly and more accurately. So we're starting to see, especially with the advent of Microsoft's new Viva suite,
yes,
discussions about business intelligence playing a role. So I'll be very curious to see how that runs into the applicant pool, and also innovation. So lots of activity was focused on, enabling people to work in large numbers from home. Then as return to work strategies were being put in place, regardless of whether there was pullback, as we've hit these different variants, the idea is that organizations need to be set up to work dynamically. From one week to the next, things can change. And so bringing innovation back into the mix as we emerge from pandemic to endemic is something that people are craving to see more of. So it'll be curious to see if that actually plays into the live applications that we see. And so, Elizabeth, what else do you have to add on a final note?
Well, these are such great points, and I think I want to pick up where you were, Ash, around this kind of inclusion and belonging, and this is going to be one of our research themes this year around how the digital workplace can really promote a kind of accessibility and diversity, inclusion, and kind of foster flourishing and well-being for employees. And I think that's going to be so key. So one of the things I think that's quite exciting is to see actually also how people's roles within this industry are evolving as they take on these areas. And research that we published this year, which we'll shortly be releasing publicly as well, is around learnings that practitioners in the digital workplace industry can take from digital anthropology. So really, becoming kind of immersed in the employee viewpoint, while of course keeping the organizational goals in mind, understanding those work styles and needs. How have people been doing during the pandemic, and what do we need to focus on now? So I think, among other areas, that's something that I'm really excited to see more of.
Fantastic. And I'm certainly hoping that as we share this podcast with both our members and our wider industry circles, that we'll be able to include a link to Dr. L. Vargas's latest research on behalf of DWG about digital anthropology. And we have a nice companion piece in the form of a podcast. We actually chatted earlier this week, as it turns out. And so, Ash and Elizabeth, I'm just thrilled that we had a chance to dip into some insights about this 5-year journey so far that has been the Digital Workplace of the Year Awards. We're equally excited about launching the 2022 awards program in the very near future and coming back to sharing the learnings around this continuing journey that is the digital workplace. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me in the studio today for a fascinating chat.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Elizabeth. So appreciate your gesture.
Thank you.
Digital Workplace Impact is brought to you by the Digital Workplace Group. DWG is a strategic partner covering all aspects of the evolving digital workplace industry, not only through membership, but also benchmarking and boutique consulting services. For more information, visit digitalworkplacegroup.com.